Okay, so we're going to start to get going now. Welcome today to everybody viewing this live and everybody that's viewing the recording. Today's webinar will be the psychological shift of using AI in security. I'm joined today by Gerron, and I'll be having a conversation today with Gerron, and also we'll take some Q&A questions at the end from the audience. So great to have you today, Gerron. So if you want to give everybody just a little bit of a brief intro on yourself, and then we'll get a conversation going.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. So like you said, my name is Gerron Cooper. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. I've been working within the field of AI for about a good number of years now. Primarily, I focus on kind of understanding the how and the why. So looking at environmental variables that impact human behavior, decision-making, and how we can better guide AI systems to more or less think more humanistic.
Cool. And then, so then just a little bit on my background. So my background right now, I'm involved with IREX, which is an artificial intelligence company specializing in security around the world. My background involves getting a master's degree in business with an emphasis in security management. I've worked at some of the top security research centers across the United States, and then now I've been involved with government security around the world really right now. And so, yeah, so just to kickstart this conversation with Gerron, some of what we're seeing kind of around the world now is an adoption in AI security. Most commonly known that we've seen is China, who obviously we don't want to be like in the Western society, but there is definitely a mass adoption of AI security taking place right now. And so how I want to start this conversation with you, Gerron, is that with AI and security right now, obviously, like when we're looking at it from a society's point of view, how do they want to adopt the technology? I think that there's a lot of fear in society. And I think there's a lot of fear on the security side, whether it's law enforcement, local governments, in actually using the technology. Because in society right now, it seems that there is no room for failure. And as we're growing and using new technologies, there has to be obviously a learning curve with any new deployment of technology, any new deployment of new practices. So that's what I see a little bit in the industry right now, is that from law enforcement and securities and government side, there is obviously apprehension and anxiety of using the technology. And also from the society's point of view, there's kind of a lack of knowledge and understanding. So from a psychologist's point of view, like what are you seeing in terms of how societies adopting AI and also in the security aspect, how there's kind of a lack of failure acceptance?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first part that I would like to that stuck out with your question is the learning curve. So when we look at how we are going to kind of implement AI systems for, like you said, for safety and security, different police systems, there is going to be a learning curve while we figure out the most ethical and effective way to put it to use. It is not meant to typically eradicate the need for human intervention. AI is used as a tool in our tool belt. It is there to assist. It is there to augment some of the other more processes that would take human beings quite longer. So it speeds up our ability to process and deal with information. And so the shift really starts where we have to fully understand or even destigmatize AI and what it can do. So when we look at the framework for everything that we know from AI, the more technical side, that becomes very, again, technical. So it's not digestible to the average consumer, correct? So we have to be more intentional about the way in which we present the information that breaks it down into chunks that people can then digest to ensure that they are, one, understand exactly what they're actually trying to accomplish, and two, how it is going to be implemented. And through that how, we look at transparency, because I think that's also people's fear. Like they don't know how things are being implemented or what they're being used for. And so that sense of that operating in the shadows kind of creates a negative viewpoint that kind of affects people's ability to adapt with the system.
Yeah, and obviously with the technology being available right now, and actually be able to benefit societies, as well as obviously we see the case studies of, like, for example, I brought up China before. That's obviously not something that would be accepted in societies in the Western world and in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah.
So it's almost what would be accepted by society, because when you have this kind of powerful technology, it's not like we put technology back in the box. Like, it's not going to be, we're not going to put it back to one side and say, okay, this is super powerful, we don't know how to use it. It's just, if we don't evolve with the technology, then that's not a path that we want to go down. And so when it's like societal issues like what we're talking about right now, obviously from the missing children to human trafficking aspect to obviously protecting our schools in recent shootings, what do you think? What are you seeing from a psychology point of view of kind of the societal issues that we have right now in security? But then how would society accept this new technology? Do you think that they're looking to embrace it, or do you think that there's still a lot of skepticism?
I think there's always going to be a percentage of the population that is going to hold some skepticisms about everything. That's more or less just human nature. But I do believe that there is an important piece that we have to understand, that all societies aren't the same. You kind of mentioned China, but I'm gonna just do it a little broader, like a Western culture versus more Eastern culture, things like that. Like each society has its own rules, its own values, its own moral codes, things like that. So but at the same time, we do have some very large overarching kind of worldviews, values, do no harm, don't hurt kids, like things like that, that kind of translate, that go across multiple cultures, different societies. So really it's going to come down to us really taking a hard look at, okay, how, from a psychological standpoint, how can we incorporate the greatest amount of overlap with those different cultures, those different societies, to create a system that is maybe not like for like adaptable for every society, but if there needs to be a change, it's a very minimal and very small change based on the idiosyncrasies of that culture or that society. So it's very much about adopting for lack of a better word, a playbook or a set of rules and guidelines.
Yeah, and then each kind of society and each kind of country has obviously subsects from the private sector and the public sector as well. So like, not naming any names, like from my personal experience, I spoke to like a huge retail organization that was very interested in using AI to find missing children, runaway children, because when children are abducted or these human trafficking victims, often they'll go to large grocery stores because you can get everything from there, from the hair dye, change of clothes, food on the way. So we actually had a great conversation in terms of using the entrance cameras to detect if any of these runaways, missing children, human trafficking victims ever appear under surveillance. And so it seems like a win-win, because society would seem to get on board with that. If the AI was only used to try and find missing children, potential runaways and human trafficking victims, if they enter retail. But then the retail came up the other way and said, the headline reads, X implements facial recognition. And then they don't read what it's being used for. They don't read obviously the benefits of it, how it wouldn't be obviously affecting their lives in any way, shape or form. They just read the headline. They lose 20% of their customers overnight. Their stock price drops. So that's one of the issues. That's one of the issues where you can look at it from a business perspective, but sometimes we have to look at it from an aspect of the greater good as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like piggybacking off of your example, I think it's also important for during the implementation, it's not just good enough to have a strong technical implementation for the right reasons, but they're also, because we live in a world where social media, where everything is examined under a microscope. Everyone has an opinion. So it is very important when we are doing these type of things to control the narrative. Put the right amount of information out there, put the right information out there. So saying, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, you're controlling your own narrative. No one is then able to infer something that could possibly be a negative to actually what you're trying to do. But that also comes from towards your original point, looking at how we get the most amount of buy-in. We start off with those things that are very universal. It's like you said, identifying missing children, stopping human trafficking, things like that every society has a vested interest in, and then we can become more specific on how things are measured, how things are done. But we need to get the greatest buy-in. We need at least 75% of the population to understand what these things are, to ensure that the implementation long-term will be sustainable and effective.
Yeah, and you think that's like a great point, because when you're talking about the acceptance of the technology and starting at kind of a yardstick, like we've just mentioned, finding missing children and finding human trafficking victims, I think that 99% of society will say, okay, we can start with this, we agree with this. But then you hear stories like, for example, the Madison Square Garden. Obviously, we don't know all the details, but recently, Madison Square Garden, if people haven't heard this story, part of a legal team, which is potentially suing Madison Square Garden, they had that legal team on a database, so it would trigger an alert if ever they appeared on their premises. And that, for me, just it's so in the gray area of being accepted. I think it's obviously, in my opinion, that's an unethical use of the technology. So it's kind of we have to start somewhere, and we have to start somewhere where society agrees with. And I think that's right with the missing children and the human trafficking victims. I think that's one thing that society will get on board for, the use of the technology and use of the AI implementations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The thing about human nature is that everything that we've ever created, every scientific advancement, well, I'm gonna say most scientific advancements have been in the name of pushing the envelope for better. There have been few inventions that were made for destructive purposes. Everything has historically been for greater good, but like everything, it's a two-way street. So everything that has a good use can also, if you toy with it enough, can have a negative use. So I think that's something that just has to be understood. Again, these systems aren't good, they aren't bad, they aren't anything, they just are what they are. They are what they're used for. And I think that's a conversation that's a lens that people have to look at things. Like, technology isn't good, technology isn't bad, technology is just technology. It's what people use it for that kind of shifts that narrative.
And I think you're right. It is what it is. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is what it is. But I think it can bridge that gap between, obviously, those that protect us, law enforcement, and society, because obviously since the pandemic and so forth, I can't remember a time where there's been such a chasm in terms of trust between society and law enforcement, especially in the United States. And so one thing which is interesting is that this can be used as a bridge where it can build that trust, because obviously those that use the system can be audited by the public to ensure that they're using it in the correct way, because it's extremely powerful technology to be able to obviously find an individual or find a vehicle or search for an event. Extremely powerful. Imagine Google for obviously all your devices, what you've got. So that's extremely powerful technology. So the ability to be able to audit them, the users, to ensure that they're using it ethically, has got to be one of the blueprints, really, to bridge that gap between those that protect us to use the technology and society.
Yeah, and I think in its infant stages, there has to be checks and balances, because as we see, because it is technology, it is programmed, it is man-made. There are certain biases, there are certain conflicts that can arise just based on code, whether we don't have enough samples of this demographic of person versus this demographic of person. So therefore we are seeing more false positives for this demographic because we don't have the data to support that. So there's a lot of work on the front end that is going to be required, and then a lot of adjustment and evaluation on the back end in terms of results and is it skewed, is it justified, all of these things. But if we are having that conversation and we are programming for that or planning for that, there's nothing that I think this technology can't do eventually. We just have to be very strategic about how it's implemented. And like you said, ethically is kind of like that first step.
Yeah, and then putting my security hat on as well, like you said, it's got to be justified. I remember, obviously, in the last, it might be about 6 or 7 years ago now, the Manchester bombings, what took place at the Ariana Grande concerts. I followed that very closely. My background involved with stadium security and so forth. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the security on site that day. He saw an individual that he suspected might cause an issue. Like, he obviously saw some issues with this individual, but this individual was of a certain different nationality to him, different descent, and he didn't want to be deemed racist by actually approaching the individual. Whereas now, those that if the AI triggers the alert and says, look, this person's been loitering for a couple of minutes, stood in this area of the facility with a backpack on, the AI has triggered the alert. Then it kind of equips the security staff, the law enforcement, to then go to them and say, look, the AI has detected loitering. The AI doesn't matter, obviously, which race, gender, nationality you are, obviously, or age you are. It just depends if it detects loitering or not. So that's one of the things as well, what AI can do. It can justify decision-making, and it can enhance decision-making as well, because one thing which the security industry needs to understand is that AI is not there to replace them. AI is there to obviously enhance their decision-making and obviously faster, more proactive approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And similar to what you said, the AI isn't making this decision based on any other factors besides this person has been here too long. They are engaging in X behaviors that typically are associated with Y. Like, it's a very systematic step and very systematic system. So it takes some of that. If there's any like cognitive biases coming into play based on person's race or ethnicity or anything like that, it kind of takes that away. And so again, that goes into how the programming, the code, making sure that we have that we do that work on the front end to ensure an ethical system.
Yeah, just switching gears a bit, like for obviously my research working at the Security Research Centre, I've just remembered years and years, one of the pain points with implementing any new security system, solution, or even just enhancing security, the pushback, what you always get is there's no return on investment. And that's been the case, obviously, throughout time. There is no return on investment. Obviously, it protects you from a liability point of view. But in terms of that, how you can't put a dollar amount next to it and say, okay, this amount, it can protect them for potential lawsuits. But I really do think that now we're entering a new age where security, using obviously artificial intelligence, is going to be able to provide that return on investment. And some industries which I think are struggling right now, and I think are going to struggle in the future, are obviously school campuses and universities through one thing or another.
That's a big one, especially here in the US.
Yeah, when it comes, because obviously when you come into my reasoning why I think that is because enrollment is down across the board. When it comes to universities, Schools right now, obviously, we know it's a sensitive topic right now with school shooting, and there's an increased amount of homeschooling, and obviously parents are becoming a lot more picky where they're sending their children to school. But in terms of like universities, to just pinpoint that, enrollment is down across the board for numerous things, and that goes from obviously safety of students, but also things like obviously AI has affected enrollment. And so I think that safety and security and I'm going to ask you this question, from a psychologist's point of view, sending somebody to university, whether it be a parent, because 85% of enrollment is still partly or wholly paid by parents, how much do you think security of their children is going to obviously be enhanced over the years since the rise of school shooting?
I can say for a fact that when I was looking at colleges, security was very, very low on my kind of thought process. I think of like when I have kids and they decide to go to college, I'm like, that's probably going to be right under probably strong academics, maybe an alumni network. It's going to be security. Like, are they safe? Like, is the campus a safe place for them to be? Because college is a time for kids to explore, figure out who they are, and you want them to be in the best environment for that. And part of that environment is going to be, are they secure in where they are? And given the amount of incidences we've seen on, and not just university campuses or college campuses in the US, but high schools, middle schools, elementaries, I think that there's going to be a shift in parental thinking. If it hasn't already occurred, it's going to be much more drastic within the next 5 to 10 years on how people view, or well, let me phrase that, how they rate school safety.
Yeah, so then when you look at like how could they do that? Because when you're looking at enhancing security, the one thing that you don't want is to affect the experience. When you talk about like the experience of universities, you don't want the students, faculty to be going through metal detectors left, right, and centre, and so forth, or enhance police presence. That's not what universities are really built for, in terms, because it's obviously it's going to ruin the experience of the students. But when it comes to obviously artificial intelligence, equipping the cameras, what they've already got, enhancing surveillance as well, it's not really affecting their experience, but it enhances the security so much. So when it comes to, we'll come to questions at the end, by the way, guys. But when it comes to like use cases, if you're talking about elementary schools, middle schools, and so forth, how many parents have potentially got restraining orders against the children? And so then the ability to detect if those individuals who have restraining orders ever appear on campuses, that's going to be absolutely huge.
Yeah. And I mean, for things like that, using facial recognition is more or less implied, because they should not be X amount of feet within a school setting. Anyway, same thing for those sexual predators, people with violent conduct against minors. So there's already a restraint for them, and all the system does is alert the security professionals that, hey, this person is within X amount of feet. They should not be, to provide that awareness. And so looking at when we look at college campuses as well, like you said, it shouldn't diminish the college experience. If anything, it should enhance it in a way that you feel much more free, much more able to do the things that you would like, obviously in a respectful and well-mannered way. But some of the best security is a security that you never see. The days of having armed guards everywhere, going through metal detectors, like some of those things are correct in certain places, in certain instances, yes. But to truly be secure, there has to be a tag team approach. So the addition of, like, I guess, more passive security systems, more behind the shadows, in addition to those people, the obvious or the active security presence. And so looking at college campuses, looking at just school campuses in general, there has to be a shift in understanding and priority. Safety was typically always implied in a school setting. I think now it has to be taken much more seriously.
Yeah, and in terms of like not affecting the experience, like you said, and you could get a point where you talk about security, the best security is one that's not seen. So the ability to add artificial intelligence eyes and ears to campuses is going to be huge. So like, for example, over 26.2% of undergrad females experience some sort of sexual assault while on campus. That is huge. So that means that 1 in 4 women will experience sexual assault on campus during their 4 years at university. So now the ability to then, first, it can trigger an alert if this individual ever screams or so forth, but then also non-compliant sex offenders, potential restraining orders against ex-boyfriends, or ex-girlfriends. So the ability to then trigger alerts if these potential problems ever arise on campus is going to be huge. So when you're talking about, like, for example, sending obviously your daughter or your son to university, knowing that it will trigger an alert if a non-compliant sex offender ever comes on campus, that's going to be huge. This is going to be huge selling points for universities in the future.
Agreed. Like it is very much, like I said before, it's going to require a shift in our thinking, a shift in our priorities. And so looking at how we address a lot of the security, and it's not necessarily downfalls, but the way that we think about it. And so, yeah.
So I'm just going to turn to a quick question that we have, and it's for you, Gerron. And it says, people really need to understand what's AI and what are the advantages to security agencies and universities.
I agree 1,000%. Like I said, there is a fear, and it could be from a place of lack of understanding. AI is still very much in its infancy stages in terms of its full capacity, its full potential. And so a lot of what we've seen in AI has been through either the media or what we've seen in television shows or movies, and those things aren't what AI is or what AI does. Those are exaggerations. Like I said, for the I'm gonna say 75% of the general public who isn't technically proficient in what AI actually is and how the AI system works and how it learns, there can be a lot of misconceived notions. And so, like you said, one of the first steps is kind of breaking that down, breaking those walls, so we all understand, oh, this is what AI is capable of. This is how it does what it does. This is how it learns. It's not going to take over our lives. It is there to help augment us, help speed up our processes. Like, there's no way, kind of going back to like the university campus, that you can have a ton of monitors. You can have as many individuals monitoring those cameras as you want. But the human brain doesn't have the capacity to synthesize, analyze, and kind of scale and rank what's going on in each of those cameras simultaneously. So the adaptation of this system provides us with a tool that gives us options and like, okay, this is this based on this is this based on this. And then again, there's still going to be a human factor at the end, but it does help speed up our information gathering process.
There always has to be a human aspect at the end. It's there to obviously enhance decision making. It's there to obviously empower those that protect us with accurate information. Like 80% of eyewitness accounts are incorrect. So the ability now for AI to never sleep and then to trigger those alerts, I think you bring up a great point, and I think you've answered the question perfectly, Gerron. And just to, I don't think I've got anything else to add on to that.
Yeah, no, like I said, and like you said, like it doesn't sleep. There is no breaks. This is a continuous system. So there is no way for something to be missed unless it is deliberate in terms of it didn't work out or nothing is missed. And so looking at its implementation, its adaptation, I think we just have to primarily focus on destigmatizing it. Like every other invention, similar to the assembly line in car factories, it helps with the process. So
yeah,
yeah,
and it's all about doing as much good, bringing as much good to the world as possible. Because right now,
absolutely,
the AI is absolutely in its infancy, but AI at the same time is not in its infancy. Our understanding and how to use AI in its infancy. I think that a great example of this, like of how society, and you might be able to elaborate on it, is that when we talked about AI 2-3 years ago, we would say that, oh, AI is going to take a lot of the manual jobs and so forth, the accountancy, things like that, what we understood of AI. The last thing that we thought was that AI would be so creative straight away. We thought that further down the road, maybe it could start doing its own art, making its own music. And actually now, since the last few months with ChatGPT, GPT-100, it's those creators, it's those that create the logos, it's those that make music, make movies, make art, that the AI is doing, is obviously being a direct threat for instantly. So I think that gives an idea of like how we're terrible at predicting where this is going. And so it's just so to predict that, our understanding of predicting obviously all the negative outcomes and all the positive outcomes, it's always so much different.
Yeah, and I think when experiencing something new, the first thing we do tend to look at is the negative. So we think we tend to lean towards, hey, what can go wrong? What can happen? We don't necessarily, and that's more or less human nature. We don't necessarily lean towards all of the things that could go right or could be so wonderful about this new technology. So it's very much about us understanding that and moving forward in the phase. Because like you said earlier, it's like Pandora's box. Once it's opened, it's open. There's no going back. You can't close the lid. The only way up is through. So we have to keep pushing, keep striving, keep understanding, keep pushing for better understanding and acceptance, because it is here. It is not going anywhere. We've seen massive investment from every major corporation there is. We've seen adaptation from, I think there are at least that I know of, like 100 different AI plugins or add-ons for different Chrome browsers or whatever it may be, doing a whole host of different things. So AI is here. It is now based on how we use it.
Yeah, and then we say how you use it as well, but then also who uses it. So, for example, if we go back to the university setting, so universities are obviously the university students have got different threats, obviously from potential, obviously weapon detection, weapons, mass shootings. Also, we talked about obviously the sexual assault rates, what occur on campuses. So there is obviously various different threats at various different levels. One of the issues which I obviously foresee is that this is going to get rolled out on a mass level before everybody's actually ready for it. And you have to have those champions, whether it's universities and states, to implement it correctly and ethically. Because security, obviously, the implementation of security is always reaction based. So there'll be an incident happen at one university, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I don't want that to happen to us, and it'll be mass rolled out. So we have to ensure it's used ethically, because one thing that obviously I envisage happening is that an incident will happen at a university, whether a banned individual appears on campus, a sex offender or so forth, and that university had the option to implement their cameras with AI detections. but they opted not to, where it would have possibly found the individual, triggered the alert, and actually not actually prevented that situation happening. So then when these situations do happen on campuses and presidents have had the opportunity to enhance what they've already got with AI and they didn't, this will be an issue for the presidents, because then they will be held accountable, obviously by the families and by the students, of why did you not equip what you've already got with AI to protect us?
Yeah, no, it is. There are going to be a lot of tough conversations that will occur on college campuses in the next 2 to 3 years, especially pertaining dealing with security and like what are schools doing to ensure that kids are safe. And so I think of this example, you use AI to detect traffic patterns, right? Similar to what people do for city planning versus this street is busy during this time, this street is busy during that time. But on the college campus, you think about it like a traffic, like a roadway. And then you see during certain times, people are moving around, they're doing these things, but you notice that there's this one particular car, quote unquote car or person, that's going against traffic patterns, or that is operating in a way that's different from everything that's been learned, or it's past a certain time. So it's 3 a.m. in the morning. We have 2 people walking home. One person's walking really fast, and we see that the second person starts to speed up walking to try and catch the person. That things like that, if you think about it, provide us with at least hey, let's take a closer look at this camera, or let's maybe just do a patrol in this particular area to make sure that there's nothing going on. So again, those are all things that an AI system can do much faster and much more efficiently than we could. And again, it still provides us with that assessment. And then it is up to the human on the end. Okay, I'm going to take a look at this, or I'm going to send someone out here patrolling campuses, especially those campuses, those larger school campuses that are in more metropolitan city areas, that there is it's not a secluded campus. So there are a lot of transient people who live off campus, a lot of commuters, things like that. And so this not only helps the college campuses, but it also helps the city at large, because it adds an additional level of security. It creates well-being within that neighborhood. It creates collaboration between the neighborhoods and the university. Like there's a lot of trickle-down effects that can happen based on this one system being implemented on some of these university campuses. So when you talk about like a dollar amount, yeah, it's hard to find that piece, but everything can't be measured in dollars when it comes to people's safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just for this part, we're close to concluding the webinar. So we're just going to answer some Q&A. So if you've got them in there, you can just enter them in the chat. So the first one that we've got in regards to humans behind the monitors. So there's been many documented cases of abuses of power by humans behind monitors. Can you talk about how AI resolves that problem? So one of the issues, obviously, that we talked about before earlier between me and Gerron is that it's that lack of trust, and Gerron mentioned that transparency. The one thing that obviously AI does, it can be built by transparency by design. So all those that are using this system, all their actions can be logged, meaning they can be audited. So for example, if you are searching potentially for a missing person and so forth, everything what you do is logged, meaning that if you're using the system unethically or in ways which obviously you've not been told to do, it's going to flag, you're going to get audited, and obviously then that's going to create a lot more transparency and a lot more trust between those using the system and those not. Because right now, obviously, there's no transparency, there's no liaison between the community and law enforcement, how they're using obviously their existing hardware and the cameras. That's not taking place right now. So the future couldn't be that it can be obviously transparent by design. Well, it is. It's being deployed right now around the world. It's the United States which is lagging behind. And so right now we need to get on top of it, because if there is not going to be this adoption and learning as we go with AI, we're just going to fall further and further behind. So yeah, that's my.
No, I'm just going to say I completely agree. And to kind of double down on what Daniel was saying, it's very much, and I think second, we had another comment in the chat, but just saying, like, in terms of checks and balances system, that is essential. There has to be a checks and balances. There has to be someone, an outside agent or third party, that is able to audit. Like Daniel said, that there's a log, there's a tracker. We know that the machine gave us this. Was it followed up? If not, why not? So having those document, and if we see that there's a consistent pattern of disregard or of lack of initiative, things like that, that creates another conversation based on, is this person behaving in the best way possible? So really just, it's important to keep those checks and balances and to hold others accountable. Because I agree, there are many documented cases about abuse of power, but it's always been by humans, never by the system. And like I said, and like I mentioned earlier, the system is neither good nor bad. It is, unfortunately, it's us.
Yeah, no, great point. I think you just did up even better than me, you know. So last question really. It's come in. It said, what is your 2 predictions for the rest of the year? So I think that we can obviously do that over the next 12 months. So we can probably end this webinar with our predictions for the next 12 months. We can maybe meet back up, John, and we can do a rerun in 2024 and see how accurate we were. So I'll let you go first. What's your predictions in a quick 60 seconds summary?
Oh, predictions. 1, AI will be in probably a part of 75% of everyone's job in the next 12 months. In some way, shape, or form, it will incorporate some AI app, in some way, shape, or form, it will be within 75% of everyone's job. Second prediction, and this is more of a hope, that it will be adapted or adopted by a larger number of not just universities, but cities and colleges.
My prediction is when it comes to obviously AI being implemented in security, what I'm seeing obviously in the United States, you always got to look at who needs it the most. And right now, who needs it the most is schools and universities. For obviously a lot of, for the same reason, but also there's obviously little differentiators in there as well. I think obviously school safety right now needs to be treated as critical infrastructures around the United States in terms of equipping with weapon detections against potential restraining order against parents, other threat detections such as loitering. Schools from the elementary, obviously middle and high schools, need to be protected as critical infrastructure. So I do see that there's going to be a mass deployment across schools. My second prediction regarding universities is that AI in security is going to become a unique selling point, because with enrollment dropping, the ability to enhance security whilst not decreasing the experience what university students have will be huge. But also I think that there will be stories where universities or potential schools had the ability to use the technology, didn't use the technology, and something bad happened. So I hope that that's not the case, but often than not in security is always too much until the day it's not enough, you know?
Yeah, it's like insurance. You don't want it until you need it. So
yes, absolutely. All right, guys, so that's going to conclude our webinar. Everybody obviously attending, we will send you a recording of this, and those that have been in and out, we can send you the recording of it as well. So thank you, guys, and thank you, Jerome.
Yes, thank you.